Skip Weber at Weber Chevrolet.
All of my stores have a whole bunch of inventory coming from Chevrolet. There's a lot of built vehicles that have been kind of in holding patterns, and we're going to get a lot of them. Our inventory is going to go through the roof. Chevrolet came back with the best discounts on electric vehicles we've ever had. Even better than when they had that special tax rebate that got everybody buying last summer. This is the best deals that we've ever had on EVs. There's a little bit of a pent-up demand because everybody bought as that deal with the government was shutting down. But now, we've been selling a trickle. We have a ton. Nobody's got as many Chevy electric vehicles as we do, period. We want to be in that market, and so we got them. So great way to save some money on that if you're inclined.
Granite City, Columbia, Illinois, Olive and 270, and online at WeberChevrolet.com. The Sunday Showgram for May 17th, 2026 is rolling here on 101.9, 94.1 and the News Talk STL app. I'm JC. We're here every Sunday morning from 7 to 9 telling great old stories. And don't forget about our show on Saturday night. Saturday night from 6 until 9 o'clock, we play rarities. We play music that hasn't been drilled into the ground by the big corporate-owned out-of-town stations. Just play the same 300 songs over and over and over again. You'll always hear something that sort of excites your ears and maybe more than that. All right, a lot of stuff going on. Of course, yesterday was the anniversary of the EF3 St. Louis tornadoes that went through, I guess tornado technically, that went through, the Forest Park area and northern parts of the city. Amazing the amount of damage that it done, and amazing that people are still mopping up. We got a lot of stuff talked about today with the anniversary of David Letterman's final show, and of course Stephen Colbert going off the air. I thought we'd go back and just talk a little bit about working with Sirajul and Mujibur from David Letterman's show from years ago. Also, we're going to talk about adventures in cable TV installation. My situation was bad enough, but I have firsthand knowledge of a situation in Ladue that happened a couple of years after mine. There was a lot more than what happened to me, so we'll deal with that too. And we're going to talk about the rise and the fall of the radio station called The River. All right, that was a insane asylum. And I was only there for a short period of time. It's a long story, though. We'll get to it. I've had some interesting conversations. I will keep this anonymous for reasons that should become obvious here as I tell the story. Two very prominent St. Louis broadcasters whose names you would know immediately told me stories recently of their bout with painkillers. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I just could not understand why when you'd be watching the news and the network news, and every commercial was about some sort of painkiller. I remember Celebrex was happening probably sometime in the maybe mid to late 80s, and then they found out that I think it did heart damage or something. They pulled it off the market. And there's still a lot of people that aren't 100% sure about some of the stuff floating around here. But the thing that we're talking about is oxycodone. And a lot has been written and reported about oxycodone in the last 10 years or so. And we know now that the family in Indiana that was responsible for making sure that we all had some and that we all suffered the consequences of it, well, I guess they got their due, but there's still enough of it floating around. And if your pain is bad enough, and they can judge that, you go into the doctor or hospital, whatever it is, they can gauge it. I remember once I went at 3:30 in the morning. I didn't know what was going on, but it felt like somebody had kicked me in the back, like in the back of the rib cage. And I went in, it was like a Saturday night at 3:30 in the morning, and they were sort of giving me the eye like, here we go. It's some addict who's just trying to get his hands on painkiller. And then they took my blood pressure, and it was 205 over 170, I believe it was. And they're like, wow, okay, you're not lying. I'm like, why would I be lying? And they started telling me stories about all the people they have coming in the middle of the night trying to get a hold of painkiller. Well, it turned out that my gallbladder was bad, and they had to rip it out of me the next day. It was pretty amazing, though, because 3:30 in the morning, on actually Friday night into Saturday, 3:30 in the morning, they diagnosed me by 5 o'clock. They scheduled surgery at 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, and they discharged me at 7 o'clock Saturday night. It was amazing because they do all that stuff arthroscopically now. But as I said, I was in discussions with two people about oxycodone, two very, very familiar names in St. Louis broadcasting. And one just said, yeah, I tried it, but I can't really use it because it just stops me up, which unfortunately is one of the byproducts of taking oxycodone. The other guy had a little bit more detailed and explicit description of going into the hospital being so constipated he couldn't even think straight, and the doctor literally had to take his thumb and shove it up his butt. And I'm like, are you serious? I mean, in modern medicine, there's no medical device other than a human finger? You can't come up with something better than that? But I'll tell you one thing, if your pain is bad enough, and constipation can be real, real bad. If your pain is bad enough, you'll do just about anything. You'll agree to just about anything they suggest that they can do to you to make the pain go away. Speaking of going away, but he isn't a pain, our buddy John Canavera. John is a guy who came in and started interning with us at, where were we? We were at Rock 93.7 KSD, the second incarnation of KSD as a rock station back in the middle 90s. Jamie Allman was doing our morning news. Karen Kelly was there. And for a while, we had the sports monster, Steve Schlanger. And a young kid comes in. He's like 20 years old, not even 21, to intern for us and became an immediate favorite. Everybody just loved him. And then after a couple of years in radio, quite a few years in radio, he decided, this is a bunch of bull. I'm getting out of this business, and went to work for Live Nation and worked his way up the chain of command at Live Nation. And now they are moving him to Kansas City to oversee the opening and the operation of their new facility in KC. So we wish our best to John and his lovely bride. His name is John, but I gave him the nickname John because he was just so young looking at the time. And unbelievably, here we are like 30 years later, and everybody I know still calls him John. Like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the rise and the fall of the river coming up. I think we're doing that next hour. I mentioned that because this past Friday was the 2-year anniversary of me beginning at a radio station known as K-Wolf. And man, I could do a dissertation on this place too, but let's just say I worked for them for 2 years and they refused to pay me. And I was being a good guy because I knew that there was a struggling up and coming signal, and a bunch of us there. Smash was there, Katie was there, a bunch of other people were there. And I said, look, I know that you're struggling here, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come to work for you, and you don't have to pay me. You just defer my payment until the financial situation here at the radio station becomes a little better off, and then you can give me all the back pay and just write me a big fat check, and we'll be fine. But for right now, it'll be fine. Just go ahead. Let's get the place on the air. Let's get it up and running. And I was doing more than just the morning show. I was doing a lot of extra work, behind the scenes stuff, and I was battling against some incredibly lazy people who, like when you put in a Pink Floyd track into the computer system, one of those tracks that ends abruptly because on the album it goes right into the next cut. So what you have to do is you have to edit it. You got to fade it out and then put it back into the system so that it just doesn't go, but that's what they did. They just left it in like that. I'm like, what a bunch of lazy SOBs. So anyhow, long story made short, after, again, dealing in an environment I would describe as an insane asylum where nobody had any idea what they were doing, and the people who were even doing anything who weren't lazy were going off in 10 different directions. And finally I said, okay, I think it's about time you give me the money. And when I did that, they refused to pay it. And they never have, by the way. But something I've found out over the years is that whenever you're dealing with some guy named Buzz, you're probably going to have trouble. I've had 3 guys named Buzz in my life. One stole my girlfriend. One I don't even want to talk about, and then there was this a-hole. Oh, and by the way, I don't even think the station's on the air anymore. I think they had to shut it off. So good job, everybody. It was on yesterday's date back in 1989. We departed for Hawaii with 80 lucky KSD listeners. We gave away 40 trips for 2. That's when radio was fun for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is they had a promotional budget. And they'd say, okay, you got an idea? Hey, we'd like to go broadcast from Abbey Road. All right, you can do that. Well, we want to broadcast from Moscow in the former Soviet Union. Oh, that sounds like fun. Yeah, I think we can do that. You want to take 40 people, 40 listeners, and their significant others to Hawaii for a week? Yeah, I think we can swing that. And so we did. I graduated high school 55 years ago yesterday. On today's date, back in 1985, somebody had the bright idea to say, okay, they do this thing, senior night. It's like the last weekend of school in St. Louis for the high schoolers, and we're going to have a band out at Six Flags, and what you're going to do, you're going to drive to Chesterfield Airport, Spirit of St. Louis out there. You're going to go out there, you're going to pick you up in a helicopter, and they're going to fly you in to Six Flags. You're going to introduce Blue Oyster Cult, and then you're going to get back on the helicopter and fly out. And for some reason, people went nuts. I mean, everybody had seen Woodstock, and you see, people coming in by helicopter. It was only me. We did that for a couple of years, if you want to know something. Also on today's date, back in 1985, I still remember it was the airing of a TV show called Cardinal Control. This was a half-hour pregame show that they would do. This was when Channel 5 still was broadcasting Cardinal games back in the day. And on nights where they had, I think it was only on weekends, but on nights where they had the Cardinal games, they would do a half-hour pregame show. And one of the producers had a wife who was in TV, and she hosted the thing. And they did a segment on the KC Morning Zoo that aired on Cardinal Control, obviously because John has been the stadium announcer there since Jesus wore shorts. And so they said, well, this is a way of highlighting John, but also tapping into this mania that is the KC Morning Zoo. And it aired, and it was funny. Man, was it funny. I still remember John, the U-Man, was running around. And he had like a holster with toy guns, like something you would buy for a 10-year-old. And he's running around the station with those on. I just remember it that way. And that was the show where we got Whitey Herzog to fess up to the idea that his favorite TV show is The Flintstones. And he really went into a dissertation about it, too, because he watched it with his grandkids. But it was so funny to hear Whitey talking about The Flintstones. On this date, back in 1991, I was in Los Angeles to do the interviews for a movie called Hudson Hawk. This was an absolutely abysmal motion picture with Bruce Willis, Danny Aiello, and Andie MacDowell. I don't know how she got roped into this, but the movie was just awful. And I remember the next day we had to get into our Sunday best and then go and interview these people. And you don't know how difficult it is to write up 10 minutes worth of questions for stars of a movie that you hated and then everybody else is going to hate and that they probably hate too. But the reason I remember this one in particular was because there was a guy named Don, I won't say his last name, but he was the reporter from Miami, because they bring in reporters from all over the country. And this guy is Don, and he was from Miami, and I came in to interview Andie MacDowell right after him. And you walk into a room and you can tell how the energy has been just sucked out of the place. Something clearly had taken place right before I got in there. And Andie MacDowell was like breathing heavily. Her face was all red as a beet. And you could tell she was pissed. And I come walking in and like, what the hell's going on in here? And the only thing I was able to find out is that because she shifted gears because she figured, okay, what just happened in here was not the fault of this new guy who's walking in. I got to be nice to him. But, oh, man, was she mad. And it turned out that this Don guy from Miami, for whatever reason, had made some comment to Andie MacDowell about her period, about her menstrual cycle. And, man, did she hit the roof. That guy, by the way, had a heart attack and died about a year later. I got some other stories I'll get to a little bit later on, but let's start the show as we always do with the weekend pickup, a collection of semi-psychotic, stupid stories you'd be better off without, but we fire them at you. Anyhow, let's go to press. Sports Illustrated revealed their 2026 swimsuit cover models this week. They are Hilary Duff, Tiffany Haddish, Alex Earle, and model Nicole Williams English. I don't know what it is about Hilary Duff. There's just something about her. Is she the prettiest girl in the world? No. She's real short. She's only about, I don't know, like 5 foot even or something like that. But I've had many, many impure thoughts about her over the years. Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey have been teased for the last few years because there's been sort of this implication that maybe they're actually brothers because they're so much alike. They're not, but it's just something they're having fun with. Well, now they got a new show called Brothers. And it addresses this whole thing that they're half brothers in real life. They'll play fictionalized versions of themselves. There's a little groundswell of people trying to get Weird Al Yankovic into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's now working on a new stage show called Dare to be Stupid, the Weird Al Musical. Let's see what happens. Al Yankovic, by the way, is his real name. There are lots of famous people who changed their names for show business. Bruno Mars, his real name is Peter Gene Hernandez. Oscar Isaac's real name is Oscar Isaac Hernandez Estrada. Michelle Yeoh was born Yeoh Chu King, but she changed it because the producer said nobody would be able to pronounce it. Haven't heard the name Caitlyn Jenner in a while, and I'm fine with that. But now somebody said, what's Caitlyn Jenner been up to lately? And it turns out that she is running a crypto scam, according to a new lawsuit. Journey has added 4 more North American dates to its farewell tour. And Kiss, well, sort of Kiss, members of Kiss, it's basically Gene Simmons, is going to do a 3-day rock expo in Vegas in September. Some members of the band plus Black Sabbath, the Police, the Kinks, and more. The Police aren't going to be there. Sting is not going to be at this. That loser Stuart Copeland might show up. Man, is he a prick. Oh, man. We had him on the air all the way back in 1990 during the Grammys in Los Angeles, and what a piece of, oh, man. For the moment he walked up to our table and sat down, he just started causing trouble. Ringo is 85. And he turns out to be the oldest rocker going out on tour this summer, followed by the Beach Boys' Mike Love at 85, Dylan's 84, Paul Simon also 84, John Anderson of Yes, 81, Clapton's 81, Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees, 81, Rod Stewart, 81, John Fogerty, 80, and the Stones, of course, coming out with a new album. Nothing seems to stop them. Not really sure what it was they were complaining about, but the FCC says that Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime show generated 2,000 complaints to the FCC. I have this feeling a lot of the complaints came from people who didn't even see the show or made the complaint before the halftime show even took place. We're doing a little story next hour about the rise and fall of the radio station The River in St. Louis. Turns out there's a movie in the works about the rise of MTV. That has a chance, I would think. Debbie Harry and Pam Anderson are going to play mother and daughter in an upcoming movie. Debbie is 80, Pam is 58, so the math works out. And Alanis Morissette, Katy Perry, and Future are among the performers for the World Cup opening ceremonies. While everybody is pretty worried about AI, how about this? According to a new report, cell phones, the resolution on the cameras on cell phones have gotten so good that cell phone cameras are able to capture high-resolution images and make it possible that your fingerprints could be extracted from a picture if you make the peace sign or a V hand gesture in selfies. People are talking about the wildest non-sexual things they've done while they were naked. Those activities include painting rooms at home, riding a horse, and frying bacon, which is just plain stupid when you stop to think about how bacon grease spatters. Especially on texts and internet stuff, we have been using the term OMG for a long time. Turns out the first use of OMG was in a letter Winston Churchill in 1917. I think by now everybody knows that Otis Redding wrote and recorded the song Respect in 1965, released it 2 years before Aretha Franklin and his song Sitting on the Dock of the Bay became a hit, but he never was around to see it be such a success because he died. His version of Respect, by the way, was focused on the man who wanted respect, and respect was a euphemism for sex. I like this stat. Costco's infamous $1.50 hot dog and soda combo, which I swear I get probably once a week, is so popular that Costco's around the country serve 124 million hot dogs a year. That comes out to be around 6 times more hot dogs than all of the Major League Baseball stadiums combined. 85% of Americans say they have avoided at least one conversation in the past month because it might lead to conflict. And there's a Mexican performer who just lifted 166 pounds. It was a woman, and she lifted that with her hair. Netflix has a new movie coming out with Adam Sandler, Grown Ups 3. It's in the works. There's also going to be a reality show about Nick Cannon and his 12 kids with 6 different mothers. I hope this doesn't catch on. Men in Russia are apparently mutilating their ears on purpose to get the so-called cauliflower look because they want to look like tough MMA fighters. And if you like Diet Coke, you might be in for a huge disappointment. The shipping logjam in the Persian Gulf is also having unexpected impacts. In India, shops have struggled to keep Diet Coke on the shelves because of a shortage of aluminum cans. A man on a motorcycle was arrested after leading police on a high-speed chase earlier this month. He was going 120 miles an hour on a motorcycle. Oh, and by the way, he was dressed as the Easter Bunny at the time. Want to take a guess what state that occurred in? F-L-A. This is sort of disturbing. Ostrich farms routinely have difficulties getting male ostriches to breed because they often find their human caretakers more attractive than female ostriches. Like I said, disturbing. Especially if you live near an ostrich sitting there looking at you from across the field going, why don't you bring your fine self over here? This might be the dumbest thing I've read this week. A company developed a high-tech spoon that'll automatically switch your phone to silent mode while you eat. It'll be available online starting tomorrow at $4.90 while supplies last. While supplies last. Why do I have this feeling there's going to be lots of supplies that are going to last for a while? All right, birthdays this week. The Gronk, Rob Gronkowski, 37. Mark Zuckerberg, that bug-eyed freak, is 42. Kate Blanchett, 57, great actress. Tim Roth, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Hateful Eight, 65. Tom Cochran, Life is a Highway. David Byrne, Talking Heads, 74. Robert Zemeckis, who I went to college with, 75. He's had a little success. Forrest Gump, Back to the Future, Romancing the Stone, Roger Rabbit, Castaway, Polar Express, the live-action version of Pinocchio. George Lucas, also having a birthday, same day, 82. Robert Zemeckis and George Lucas, 2 of our best filmmakers born on the same day. Lena Dunham, have you seen pictures of her lately? It looks like she's put on 100 pounds. And she likes to do that show, Girls, and go naked a lot of the time. Please, don't do us any favors. Stephen Colbert turned 62. Dennis Rodman, 65. Stevie Wonder, 76. By the way, he's got 25 Grammys, the most ever by a male solo artist. Harvey Keitel, 87. Sabrina Carpenter, 27. Martha Quinn, original MTV VJ, 67. Bob Marley died of cancer in Miami this week in 1981. He was only 36. 41 years ago, 1985, Springsteen married Julianne Phillips. In a secret ceremony, they divorced nearly 4 years later. I interviewed her right after the divorce, and she was surprisingly candid about it. She just said, look, people are going to say what they're going to want to say. They don't know anything, blah, 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 whatever. Next. She was in a movie with John Ritter, a Blake Edwards movie, by the way, called Skin Deep, which was not a great movie, but had some real funny scenes in it. Frasier aired its final episode 22 years ago this week. Family Ties aired its final episode after 7 years on NBC, 37 years ago. That was 1989. Seinfeld's final episode after 9 years on NBC aired this week in 1998. And old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra, had a heart attack and died at the age of 82 this week, 1998. His last words were, "I'm losing." All right, that's it. The weekend pickup. That's how we start the show every week here on JC's Sunday Showgram on 101.9, 94.1 and the News Talk STL app. We're going to talk about cable installation nightmares. That's up next here on the Sunday Showgram. Stick around.
Radio? Who needs a radio?
Like what you're hearing? Don't forget JC's Wayback Machine every Saturday night from 6 until 9 on 101.9 and 94.1 News Talk STL and the free News Talk STL app.
For most of my life, I've been the kind of guy who's really, really nice to people who have to work on something at the house. Pool attendant, electrician, maids, plumber, doesn't matter. Somebody's got to come to the house to do some work for you. I treat them with the utmost respect. I call them ma'am and sir. I don't give them a hard time. I just sort of lay back, let them do their work. In recent years, I've stopped doing that because it turns out it doesn't pay off. When you're nice to somebody now, they see that as an opportunity to take advantage of you. And I've been taken advantage of a couple of times. And so now I'm not nice anymore. And it's a shame it's come to that. But the other way just stopped working. I don't know if I changed or if people changed or what the situation is. All I know is it just doesn't work anymore. It's not like I'm going to go around being a prick to people. It's just that I'm not Mr. Nice Guy anymore. I'm just keep it all business. And I stay in the room with them when they're doing whatever it is they're doing. I don't stand there looking at them. I just, do something on my phone or something, but I stay in the same room so they know I'm there. Back in the day when I was still being nice to people, I have the following story. Moved into a new house in Brentwood on White Avenue. This would have been somewhere in the mid-90s. I couldn't tell you the exact year, but oh, yes, I can. There it is right there. Okay, sorry. It was 1997. All right, 1997. And back then we had something called TCI Cable. I don't remember what it stood for. I don't care. But they were the cable company in Brentwood, and I'd call them up, and I said, install the cable. Okay, we'll be there on Thursday. It was the Thursday before the Memorial Day holiday. So the kid shows up, and he was a kid. He didn't look to be more than about 22. And, it was the early part of the afternoon, and he just seemed so rushed. And I was looking at him like, what's going on, dude? You're not at a bar, and it's not closing time, and there's still a couple of hours left in the workday. Why are you acting so frantic? Well, in the process, as he's, stripping cable and running wires and doing all this sort of stuff, he mentions that he's meeting up with his friends at the lake for a long Memorial Day holiday, and I think you can see where this is going. A couple of things didn't go exactly the way he wanted, wasn't getting the right signal. You could tell he was getting more frustrated. He was getting more nervous because he's thinking to himself, I should be on the road right now. I should be on 70 heading towards Lake of the Ozarks, and instead I'm at this doofus's house trying to install his cable. This, by the way, is not my problem. It's his problem. He's still got to do his job. So I'm just standing there watching all of this, and he's having all sorts of trouble. And he finally gets the thing wired up to the point where it's going to work. But I had 4 or 5 TVs. And when he finds this out, you can tell, oh, God. And I'm thinking to myself, he's just going to end up doing a crappy job anyhow. And I know enough about this that once I get the cable to the house, I can do the rest of it. All you do is take your coax and screw it in and then screw the other end into the TV or the VCR back then, and you're set to go. And so it's not that big a deal. So I tell him, all right, if you can just do this part of it, I'll do the rest, and you can run off to be with your drunken buddies down at the lake. So here's all I need. I have this system in my studio, in my office, where I need it split from one TV to another TV right next to it. The TV right next to it was the one that I had hooked up to the tape recorder so that whenever you listened to the old radio show back in the day and you would hear me play something that had been stolen off of TV, that's where it came from. It came from that little TV next to the big one. This was before we had the technology that we have today. This is 1997. So he says to me, oh, but I would need a splitter for that. And I go, don't worry about it. I have the splitter. Just hook it up so that it works. I'll do the rest of it. I have the coax. Just get it to the point where there's a signal that can be split and go to 2 TVs, and you're off the hook. You run, you go. Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks. And he hooks the thing up, and it's just wires laying on the floor. I don't have anything actually hooked up to the TVs yet, but I know what to do from here. I was the kind of guy back in the 90s and the 80s who would go around and set up people's VCRs. People would move into a new house or they get a new TV or a new VCR and would have trouble with it. I'll come over. I knew how to do all that stuff. So I figured it's not a big deal. And so just go on your way, go on, whatever. So if you're familiar with a splitter, it's a little metal box. It's a little tiny thing, size of a matchbox, and you stick one coaxial cable into one hole, and then you stick the other coaxial cable into the other hole, and then you turn it around, and you take the main outlet, you take the main cable feed, and you screw that into the other side, and then you hook the 2 sides up to the 2 TVs, and you're good to go. No problem, right? So I'm behind the TVs, and I've got my screwdrivers and my wrenches and all that sort of stuff. But when the little pin of the coaxial cable touches the outside of the splitter, which is made of metal, boom! There's a flash of light, there's smoke, and the whole system goes out. So I'm standing there, and I call the cable company, and of course, well, we can't get anybody there until Tuesday or Wednesday of next week because of the holiday. I'm like, yeah, but your guy was just here. Can't you call him and tell him to turn around and come and fix this? Because, and the guy cuts me off and goes, sir, there's no electrical current that goes to coaxial cable in a cable system. And I said, I know there's not supposed to be, but I'm telling you right now, I touched that pin to the splitter and there was a flash. There was a small explosion and smoke, and the whole system's out now. It done blowed up. And he's like, no, there's no electrical power that goes to coaxial cable. And I'm like, I know there's not supposed to be, but he did something wrong, and I've got electricity going into my coax, and I don't have any television for the next 4 or 5 days because of this. I'm sorry. Everybody's off. Everybody's off for the holiday. We can schedule you for Tuesday afternoon. This is Thursday. Well, he sent a different guy on Tuesday of the following week after I went all weekend without a damn television. I didn't have an antenna. Again, like I said, it's 1997. It's not like it is now where if you have some sort of streaming system, geez, you can get on your phone. You can get a TV picture on your electric toothbrush. So when the new guy shows up the following Tuesday and I tell him what happened, he's looking at me like, yeah, right, okay. But then I show him the little splitter. There's like a whole big brown spot on it from when the explosion took place. He's like, well, there's not supposed to be any electricity into the car. I know there's not supposed to be. I don't know what this guy who came last Thursday did, but somehow he got some wires crossed somewhere. And can you just fix it so it freaking works? Which he finally did, and I'm just so glad that we don't have cable companies and guys having to come to your house anymore. And if you're saying, oh, we still have cable companies, JC. Maybe you do. I don't. I'll take my Roku box and YouTube TV anytime. Now, I told you that I did have one story that's even worse than that. And this one you won't believe. There's these houses right on the edge of Ladue, right where Ladue turns into Olivet, sort of over by Warson, just south of Olive. And buried in there, and it's really weird because the streets don't sort of connect or seem to go anywhere. It's almost like the houses are hidden, and maybe that's why people like them. I don't know. But there's a $3 million house back in there, and a guy had moved into a brand new house. I guess it was brand new construction, $3 million. And all he had time to do was move in some furniture, a couple of recliners, a couple of chairs and tables and stuff like that. That's all that was in the house. And he calls up the cable company, like I did, and says, can you install my cable? Yes, absolutely, no problem. So the guy shows up, and I'm going to tell you this story in reverse order. The cable guy shows up, and minutes later, there was a house fire, and the house burned to the ground, along with his new furniture Luckily for him, that's all that was in there. But when the fire department did its investigation as to what the hell happened, they found out. I shouldn't laugh. This poor guy. They found out that the cable guy came, and it was like a utility room in the basement somewhere. And he starts drilling holes in the wall to hook up the cable box. But he didn't bother to check what was on the other side of the wall, which was the electrical box, all the circuit breakers for the house. And so then when he drilled through the wall of the utility room, he drilled right into the electrical box, which caused a spark, which caused a fire, which caused, I'm just guessing, a noticeable lawsuit for the cable installer and that company. I mean, I'm taking a wild guess. Moral of the story? Don't watch TV. Listen to the radio.
It's JC's Sunday Showgram on News Talk STL.
Dead time is over as we get closer and closer to the Memorial Day holiday. Now all the big summer movies start coming out, and then the big summer blockbusters start coming out, and that happens all summer long, and then it starts to tail off around, late August and September, and then there's another dead time up until about November when all the Oscar bait starts coming out, and then the Christmas rush. I can tell you a lot of times whether a movie is going to be good or bad just based on when it's released. You get a movie released in January, in the middle of winter, guess what? Probably not going to be any good. Then you get a couple of movies around Valentine's Day. They try to get people in for the romantic comedies. But then you get into late February, all of March and April, that's dead time too. Like I said, then things start picking up as you get closer to Memorial Day, and you know the rest. So we'll talk about that next hour. A lot of people ask me, I still get this question, even though I've told it a number of times that it was in the first book that I wrote. But, sometimes people just don't remember, or it's just not a really important thing in their lives. But I still do get a lot of questions, and the story is actually sort of interesting. In early 1984, after I had been, going to go back. A couple of years I had been at DC 101 radio station in Washington, D.C., working with Howard Stern. But I knew that things weren't going anywhere for me. There was a long story as to why that was the case, but I had to get out of Washington, D.C. Also, it was expensive as hell, and they just weren't paying me much money. I'm thinking to myself, I'm never going to get my head above water working here for this amount of money. What I need to do is, I'd gotten into this thing, got this silly idea in my head to get into middle-level management. Things like, assistant program director or marketing director and stuff like that. I just figured, okay, I'll use my brain to accelerate my career a little bit. And I had people like Howard Stern, in fact, come to me and say, I've heard you on the air. You should be on the air. You shouldn't be stuck in an office back here doing marketing and assistant PD and all that sort of stuff. You should be on the air. And I decided that Howard was right. So I figure, okay, what I got to do is I got to get a running start, get a step back to get a running start. So I found a radio station in Buffalo, New York that would hire me. So I went to Buffalo, and I was there for a year. And it was a rocky time. The guy who was the boss had been promoted from the top sales guy at the AM station across the hall. So I guess somebody had a bright idea going, hey, this guy really did well in sales on AM. Let's put him in charge of the entire FM station. As you might suspect, he didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. He had no idea what he was doing. He was constantly telling us how to do our radio show. And I'm like, we don't need any help. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, nothing you have ever said has indicated to me that you know anything anyhow. I know, he's the boss, so you got to give him at least some sort of cred, but that's about it. Some sort of cred. So I just reached a point where after about a year in Buffalo, I didn't like it there anyhow. I didn't like the people that they had me working with. And I just figured, you know what? From now on, I'm just doing the show. Let the pieces fall where they may. If they fire me, they fire me. But at least I'm going to have good tapes to use to try to get a better job somewhere. So that's exactly what I did. I had the mayor of the city of Buffalo write hate mail to me. And also, does the name Ray Kroc mean anything to you, Ray Kroc was the guy who basically stole the entire McDonald's franchise away from the McDonald brothers in Southern California. If you see the movie, Michael Keaton plays Ray Kroc, and he's a son of a gun. He just moved in on him and wrestled the entire company away from the McDonald brothers. So I knew he wasn't a good guy anyhow. Well, he dies. And we started making jokes about McDonald's. I'm going to go to the McFuneral, that sort of stuff. You deserve a wake today, which I thought was pretty clever. Audience loved us. We were winning readers' polls, and we were getting awards from the Alternative magazine. And, the people listening loved us. Management did not share their opinion. And so this guy finally, I was, oh, God. One day I get off the air at 10 o'clock, and I swear to you, I'm standing at the urinal in the men's room, and the guy comes up, the general manager comes up behind me and says, I think that's going to be about it. You're fired. Now, what I should have done is I should have just wheeled around and pissed all over his pants leg, but I didn't. But I was actually fired at the urinal in the men's room. So now I started sending out tapes, and that's how you get jobs in radio, at least the way. I don't know how people are doing it now. I haven't done it like this in years, but I guess it's the way it works. The problem is there's no jobs anymore. All they're doing is laying people off and trying to run radio stations with fewer and fewer and fewer people. The TV industry is caught on to that too, and you see what the outcome is. It's people who don't know what they're doing, who make constant mistakes and can't spell and mispronounce words, and that's sort of the way of the world right now. So I don't know if this exists in other industries too, but in the radio business, they have something called blind box ads. And what you do is you send your tape and your resume to this blind box ad. You don't even know where the radio station is. You don't know anything about it other than they've placed an ad that says, we're looking for a new morning show. If this is you, they describe a little bit about what they're doing. We're in the Midwest and we're looking for something crazy and blah, blah, blah. So I send this thing off. Well, it turns out it's Casey. So they call me and ask for more tape. I send them more tape. I send them television stuff too. They fly me to St. Louis and they stick me in the airport Marriott for almost 3 days. And they say, we just want you to listen to the radio market. We want to know, after you listen for 2 or 3 days, how you think you'd do if we brought you to St. Louis. So after the 2.5 days, we all go out to lunch, some Chinese restaurant down on Watson Road that's not there anymore. They say, how do you think you'll do? And I said, unless there is something really, really odd about the city of St. Louis, I figure I can take over the city in about a year. And I was wrong. It took about 6 months. It took about 6 months. One of the more interesting things that has come about with regard to being an old dad, and I am. My daughter is 16. She'll be 17 in September. We're still paying off the depreciation on the garage door. She's taking driver's ed. And a couple of months ago, got confused coming up the driveway and went right through the garage door. $4,600 claim on that, but I digress. But she's starting to figure out the world, and she's starting to become much more social and getting out there and hanging out with her friends. And one of the things that's happening is she's going to a lot more movies. And as a movie critic for the last 40 years, something like that, I've been trying to sort of, you don't want to try to tell her what she should be thinking, but you try to steer her in the direction of using her brain and doing it all herself so she can learn to discriminate with regard to movies that are good and movies that are not good. And the most recent example is The Devil Wears Prada 2, which was interesting because she went when the movie opened and she came back and didn't really like it, only gave it like a 5 out of 10, but then went again, this time with her friend and their family and a much bigger audience in the theater that night, and came back liking the movie a lot more. And this is where it gets into a very, very interesting psychological phenomenon that the movie studios used to use to their benefit all the time. Now, if you've heard me talk about this before, just bear with me here. But for people who've never heard me go into a lot of detail with regard to the, 16 years that I did the movie junkets working with the movie studios, primarily in Los Angeles, but also in New York. And as I said, during that period from 1985 to 1999, I went to Los Angeles 175 times and New York 225 times. So over 400 trips in a 16-year period. At one point, I had something like 500,000 frequent flyer miles on TWA, and they liked me because I always went on the air and said nice things about them. And so I would go to the gate, a little service desk there. And this was in the days, by the way, you could get to the airport 15 minutes before your flight, and you didn't have to worry about anything. All of this before 9/11. And it was great because I got off the air at 10 o'clock, but I had an 11:30 flight to Los Angeles a couple of times a month. And you really learn how to manage those situations and manage the system. You knew just exactly how many minutes it was going to take you to get to the airport, park, and get to the gate. And, if you got delayed for some reason, you saw the clock ticking and you knew, I may not make this. But like I said, it was that flight. It originated in New York, which is part of the story I'll get to in a minute. The flight would originate in New York, stop in St. Louis, refuel, pick up more passengers, and then go on to Los Angeles. And it was interesting because given the fact that the flight originated in the Big Apple, a lot of times they get on the plane, they would always upgrade me to first class or at the absolute minimum business class, but pretty much first class. Now you're sitting in first class with people from New York going to Los Angeles, and frequently there were people on that flight who were famous. I remember Doc Severinsen from The Tonight Show. He was on one of the flights. I had Lou Ferrigno, the Incredible Hulk, sitting right next to me once. And that was interesting because, he wears hearing aids and has significant hearing loss. And now, you got that noise from the plane during a 3.5 hour, almost 4 hour flight. And you're trying to communicate with the guy, and he can't really hear that well. And at the same time, you don't want to talk to him like he's a child, by over enunciating words. It was a really sort of a difficult thing, but he was cool about it. And we had, some nice discussions, and, he recorded an ID for the show and everything like that. Once I got on the plane in first class, and I wasn't really paying attention to what was around me, and I took my seat. And I noticed that the guy in front of me, who had sort of it was an afro, but it was one of those relaxed afros, I guess you would say, almost like like in Pulp Fiction, the wig that Samuel L. Jackson was wearing, it was something like that. And I noticed that the flight attendants were making a pretty big deal out of the guy. And I also noticed that he was sketching the entire time. He had a big pad of artist paper, probably something that was like 14 by 20 or something. And he had some sort of pen that was almost like a charcoal type pen. And he was drawing the entire time. And a couple of the sketches that he did, he handed to the flight attendants who, as I said, were making like a huge deal out of him. And I was like, who the hell is this guy? Why are they making such a big deal out of him? And it wasn't until the flight ended that I saw him get up. Well, it turned out it was Miles Davis. One of the more interesting flights I was on, I had Zippy the Chimp. Now, Zippy is a sort of famous in Hollywood, and I still remember they did on Letterman, they did the late night monkey cam, and they attached a camera to Zippy, and then they just let him run out onto the set, and you got the shot from above his head where the camera was, the late night monkey cam. And that same night, Sandra Bernhard was on, and Zippy, for whatever reason, bit her. And she did the entire interview with a wrap, a cold wrap on her finger that they had given her. I guess there's a first aid guy around there in the Ed Sullivan Theater, and they wrapped an ice pack on her fingers. He bit her. Maybe it was just on principle. I don't know. Jimmy Connors was sitting next to me once on a flight into New York. We had a nice chat. Well, let's stick with the LA stuff because that's really where this whole thing is going with regard to movies. Now, the movie studios do these things called junkets. And the way it would work is they would contact you if you were a television reporter and did entertainment-related stuff as I did. We get a call from the movie studio, and they said, okay, the Batman movie is coming out, and you'll get a chance to see it, and you want to come to L.A. for the junket. I'd be like, hell yeah. So I would get to the airport, catch that 11:30 flight to Los Angeles. Would land. It was early afternoon because of the time change. You'd grab a cab. This was all before Uber. You'd grab a cab, and it would take you through Los Angeles all the way into, sometimes Brentwood, sometimes Hollywood, but usually one of the suburbs. There was a really, really nice hotel called the Westwood Marquis. Oh, my God, was this place gorgeous, and the rooms were just plush, and the bedding was just out of this world. It was the kind of bedding that you could have slept the entire flight, but you get to your room, and you lay down on that bed, you fall asleep again. If the weather was nice, you could go out to the pool for a couple of hours, and then you had to get yourself ready and be downstairs at about 6 o'clock, and a bus, a really nice bus, would load up all of these movie critics from all over the country. Probably say there were maybe about 70 of us on a regular basis, and take you to the movie theater and sit your ass down in the movie theater, and then you'd see the movie, and then there would be a little cocktail party afterwards back at the hotel, and they would hand you a little packet that was full of production notes about the movie and also your schedule for the interviews. And it would be like, okay, your first interview is at 9:10 tomorrow morning, and you'll interview Michael Keaton and Tim Burton, and then at 9:30 it's Kim Basinger, and then Robert Wool at 9:40, and you would do your interviews, usually about 4 of them. They were each 10 minutes long, and when you were finished with your interviews, they would give you your tapes in a box, and you would take them back to the room and get ready for the next movie and the next round of interviews. Same drill on Saturday night. See another movie, 6 o'clock, the bus takes you, same drill, get up on Sunday morning, do interviews, and then take your big box of tapes down to the front desk. They would ship them to St. Louis. They'd be waiting for me when I got back. A lot of times there was swag, jackets and tote bags. And I remember I got stopped at the airport once because, honest God, this is a true story. They had given us one of those big travel bags that said Lethal Weapon 2. And the TSA people didn't like that till I explained to them it's just from the movie. I'm a movie critic. They gave it to me for free, and they were like, okay with it. Probably now they would say you can't get on the plane with that bag. Things have changed. But you get a lot of free stuff, a lot of T-shirts and hats and stuff like that. Just stuff that in your suitcase. And you would come back to St. Louis, and now you got to watch the interviews, because the reality of you sitting there and doing the interviews sometimes a little different than what ends up on the tape. You think you got something that was great, and you get back and you look at it and say, that's not that great after all. And sometimes it's the exact opposite. You're like, wow, I didn't even see her blink like that. That's really cool. And you're like, oh, I got something better than what I thought I had. And you go back to the TV station and have to, write the story, put the whole thing together. And at some point in the whole process, you would schedule a time on the TV station to actually do the review of the movie, because the interviews are one thing. Telling people whether the movie was any good or not is something completely different. Now, first, let's just talk about movie critics in general. Most people have sort of a love-hate relationship with movie critics. They're like, well, I'll see the movie myself. Well, I'll decide if it's any good. That often happens after a bad review of a movie. And people go, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And usually what that means is that the person who's doing that talking, doing that yakking, likes the previous work of the star who is in that movie and has already decided they want to see it. So anything you say or do is not going to affect them because their mind is already made up. What I always do in terms of explanation of the worth of a movie critic is that over the course of time, you sort of decide whether or not this person knows what they're talking about. And if you are watching some movie critic, and things are different now, with the internet and everything like that, but back in the day when it was pretty much people just in newspapers and on television who would give you movie reviews, a little bit on radio, but not that much. And you would decide this person's an idiot. So you just do the opposite of what they say. If they say the movie stinks, you'd go, it's probably good, and vice versa. Or as they say in Missouri, vice versa, which of course is incorrect. But again, I digress. But I always sort of lay out this scenario, and it goes like this. You have a couple, and they say, hey, honey, let's go out and see such and such movie on Saturday night. Okay, great. Let's call the Millers. You know what? Let's have dinner before the movie, and the four of us will go to dinner, and then we go to the movie. It'll be a great evening. And you have your dinner, and you go out, you get to the theater, the movie's sold out. The movie you want to see, you can't get into. So now you're standing there looking at that big marquee with a list of maybe 20 movies in some cases with these big, metroplexes, and you're just standing there, and then somebody says, hey, you know what? I heard that J.C. Corcoran say that such and such a movie is pretty good. Let's see that. Because we're not going to just get in the car and go home at this point. We're at the movie theater. And that's where the value sort of comes in, because now somebody who has to make a decision and doesn't really know anything about any of the movies might remember something that you said that was good or bad about a particular movie. The problem is that when I started doing these movie junkets in 1985, almost all of the reporters from all over the country, you got a guy from Denver and a guy from Cincinnati and a guy from upstate New York and a guy, and you have all these people. When I started, those people were all television news reporters who also did entertainment. And what transpired, what happened over the course of time is that those people were replaced by, I don't even know how to describe them, just media creations who somehow talk their way into a television station, and they just show up, and they're not reporters. They don't even have, in many cases, a journalism background. A lot of them, frankly, started out as goofy co-hosts on morning radio shows and either were approached by the TV stations or went knocking on doors saying, hey, look, I could, I'm very popular on radio. I could do stuff for you on television. That's the case in St. Louis, as a matter of fact. There's a lot of people who I see doing movie reviews, and I know for a fact they have no journalistic background. They've got no real training. Their judgment is, I think, to be questioned most of the time, but they got the gig, and so they do it. But my point is this. There's a big difference from somebody who's been trained in journalism and giving an objective report on a movie and having a heart and a soul and some legitimacy and some credibility. And you're there and you're not screwing around. And you get on TV and it is your reputation on the line. And so you're not going to say anything that's not true. And no matter how much pressure you might get from the movie studio who's hyping the hell out of a movie, you might go, this thing really was a disappointment. And so you go on television and you say that. I worked with a guy once who also did some movie reviews, and he said, when I go on television, the way I see it is I'm there to promote the movie. And right there, I looked at him and thought to myself, wow. So you're going to go on and you're going to hype a movie that stinks, but you're going to tell people it's good. And why are you doing that? Well, the reason he's doing it is because the whole system can become very, very seductive, because I know for a fact that some of these people coming out of coming out of New Orleans or coming out of Denver or whatever, these people are making about $38,000, maybe $40,000 a year. Their gig on television is probably part-time. So if they're even getting that would be a big deal for a lot of them. And they're trying to, build what they have into something bigger, and they don't want to lose the connection with the movie studios. And if the studios, and they did monitor what we said, if the studios find out that they paid for you to come out to Los Angeles for a weekend, and they wined you and they dined you and they fed you and they gave you access to all these movie stars, and then you go back to New Orleans and you go, the movie stinks. They find out about that and they don't like it, and guess what? They stop inviting you. And so right there, the entire system starts to become corrupt, because what it's supposed to be about is a reporter going out, seeing a movie, then coming back and telling you whether the movie's any good or not. And instead, what it turns out to be is these people are, in essence, working for the movie studios. And that is why sometimes you'll see stuff all over the paper or all over the internet or all over TV. And everybody's talking about, oh, you got to see this movie, you got to see this movie, you got to see this movie. And then you go and you go, the hell was that? That movie sucked. Well, you are the victim of a corrupt system. On the final day of interviews, well, let me back up. First of all, you would go into the hospitality suite where you would sit and you would wait for your turn to be called to go do the interview. And usually there's, 10 or 15 people sitting around because you want to get there, in plenty of time. And so everybody's just sitting around. But they had these spreads. I'm telling you, you would not believe it. That was one of the nice things about going on some of these junkets. First of all, it'd be nice to be able to go to California where it's, 85 degrees in the middle of January while it's 25 degrees in St. Louis. So that was nice. And the other thing is the food and the fruit. I love fruit. I love fruit. And the fruit you get from Schnucks or Dierbergs or whatever in the middle of winter is okay, but it's not as good as fruit that's in season. Well, in California, I don't know how they did it, I guess because of the weather, but everything just seemed like it was always in season. And so you had this spread, and I'm talking about something that was about 10 feet long. And you had strawberries and chocolate-covered strawberries and blueberries and kiwi and oranges and just everything. And then they would always have, depending on the time of day, in the morning they would have, lox and bagels, and by lunchtime it was real food. And I watched people take plastic bags and take a fistful of shrimp, stuff it in the plastic bag, and then stuff it in her purse. And that was going to be what she's going to eat on the plane on the way back. It's going to be the best meal she had all week. So you're sort of getting the idea about how a system can become very, very corrupt, because just think about it. If it's you and you're thinking to yourself, I get all this free stuff, I get all this access to these movie stars, I get to come back to my home city and act like a real big shot because I was just in California with George Clooney. Plus, look at all this food that I got to eat, and I got to stay in a 5-star hotel. I'm not sure I want to lose this. I'm not sure I want to mess this up. So I guess, the moral of the story is you got to be careful on who you believe. And like I said at the very beginning of this rant, you decide whether or not somebody has credibility or somebody at least has a similar taste in movies to yours. And then you trust that person just like you would trust anybody else in any other capacity. You trust him because, all right, I've heard this guy now for a couple of months or a couple of years, and he seems to be making sense. And my view of things seems to be in focus with his or hers. And so I'm going to listen to what this person says. But like I said, when I started, this whole thing was reporters, people who actually had background and training. And now you get these people who look like runway models or guys who, wear all this urban stuff. And, they look like somebody who went to MTV school back in the 90s. That's the level of their credibility. I look like somebody who should be doing this. This guy, Byron Allen, who's taking over for Colbert, the beginning of, not this week, the beginning of next week, with this, what the hell is it, Comics Unleashed? He was one of those guys. He was a teenager. He was like 19 years old when he was on Real People back in the, late 70s, early 80s. And that show went off the air, and now you're 22 years old, and, your career could very easily end right there. But he started doing movie junkets, and he somehow worked a deal where his movie interviews went into syndication, which means that he puts all of those interviews together in a half-hour show and then offers it to television stations all over the country. And that's how he got started. And somehow he cultivated all of that into a corporation, into a company that's worth a lot of money. And now he's going to be taking over for Stephen Colbert. And the other thing that was part of the Hollywood hype factory is that they would hand you a little index card and a pencil when you're coming out of the movie, and they want your quote. They want your quote. And you're supposed to say something clever. The best movie of the year. 10 stars. That kind of crap. That same guy I was telling you about a minute ago who said, I'm there to promote the movie. One time he saw a movie that was awful, and his quote was, "What a cast." And that quote appeared in the newspaper. What a cast. I said, I thought you hated the movie. Well, I did, but the cast was good. Is that being honest with people? Of course not. I mean, I got quoted once in a while, but there was never anything manufactured, and I never lied to people. I remember when I saw The Naked Gun, I go, people will be laughing at this movie 50 years from now. I think they used that in a quote somewhere, but I'll be really honest with you, I don't think I've ever told anybody this before, because it still happens now when I see movies. I'll be walking out of a movie with my little index card and my pencil, and I will wait for a crowd of people to exit the theater and sort of embed myself in with them and try to slip out without them seeing me, because I didn't like the movie, but I'm not going to write that down. They're going to get pissed. They'll stop inviting me. So I just sort of slip out. It was Martin Mull, comedian Martin Mull, who coined the saying, Hollywood is like high school with money.
It's JC's Sunday Showgram on News Talk STL.
One of the big reasons we are able to do this show every week for you is because of our friends at Window World. 1-800-GET-WINDOWS, one of only 2 replacement window companies that has the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, and also the BBB just loves them. You get a lifetime warranty that covers all parts, glass breakage, and labor, which means that you get your windows from Window World and something happens. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. It could be Mother Nature. You know, you get a hailstorm that damages the window from the outside, or a baseball goes through it, or just something happens. Doesn't matter. All you do is call their number and they will send somebody out and fix it. No questions asked. Doesn't get any better than that. Window World uses that double-strength glass that gives it strength not commonly used in replacement windows. It's all about energy efficiency. We spent the last 6 months trying to keep the cold air out. Now we got to try to keep the heat and the humidity out. And right now, Window World, 1-800-GET-WINDOWS, is offering 36 months same as cash financing with approved credit. They're open 7 days a week. There's somebody from the staff available all the time. And you'll be talking to somebody you might even know, because everybody associated with Window World, born and raised St. Louis, over 23 years now, and their fundraising efforts for the community are just amazing. They've raised over $4 million for local charities in the last 20 years. 1-800-GET-WINDOWS. It's Window World, 1-800-GET-WINDOWS. Well, I was about to say that this is the time of year that people start planning vacations, but the truth of it is that people are already going on vacations. As soon as those kids get out of school, boom, gone. Skip Weber joins us now from Weber Chevrolet. Let's talk about museums. Not to get all snooty on people, but there are some great museums that are just as much fun as any amusement park. So you got museums, you got Hall of Fames. Let's talk about those.
I've been to no Hall of Fame museums. I've been to lots of museums, but I wanted to go to Cooperstown and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame many times, and I've never been.
All right, let's talk about the Chicago museums, because believe it or not, Skip, and this is just absolutely astonishing to me, I've met people in St. Louis who lived there their entire lives that have never even been to Chicago. So let's talk about that.
Well, I've been to all of them. I've been to the Art Museum. I've been to the Science and Industry. I've been to the Natural History Museum. And I've been to the Shed Aquarium. And I guess it's not really a museum, but it's still great educational building there on the lakefront. The Art Museum was the first I went to, believe it or not. I went when I was in junior high. For one unexplainable reason, I was taking Latin as my foreign language in Parkway schools. My Latin class took a field trip to see the Pompeii exhibit. Left at 3:00 in the morning, and we saw all the treasures of Pompeii. I talked so much about it that my family went back. I think that summer we actually got to see the whole museum, so that was cool. And then the science and industry is amazing, and I'd like to go see it now. It's been a few years because the technology just skyrockets. But back in the day, you had stuff from the space landings and things like that, which are almost prehistoric now.
Did you go to the submarine?
I did.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes, it was great. And it taught me that I did not want to do that because I was tall even back then.
And Shed Aquarium has been expanded. I don't know when you went, but they've expanded that whole thing.
5 times, yeah.
Oh, man, that place is amazing. And then just down the road a little bit south of Shed Aquarium, you have the Art Museum.
We love it because you've got things, it's on Lake Michigan. So you think, oh, my gosh, they're going to have pike and walleye and it'll be cool. And they have that giant snapping turtle. I don't know if it's still alive, but it was like 100-year-old snapping turtle, as big as a boulder. It was really, really cool. But they've got all this saltwater stuff. They have a dolphin pool, the dolphin show, and they got sea otters, and they got, octopus. And it's not just a freshwater aquarium. It's an amazing place.
All of these places are 5 hours away, and people just don't understand the treasures that are up there. And you can Google all of the information and they'll explain what hours and how much it costs and everything. But that Museum of Science and Industry alone, if you just go there and the Shed Aquarium, you've been to 2 remarkable places. Yeah. I'm bringing all this up because I took my dad to the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and this date back in 2002. He only lived a couple of years longer than that. I was really glad that I was able to get him there. And like you said, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, you got to spend at least 1 full day there. And I always tell people, give yourself at least an hour or 2 just for the gift shop alone. The gift shop is the size of a frickin' Buc-ee's, and they have everything you could imagine.
And the other thing, the Natural History Museum is great. Once again, I talk about how much we love animals. I mean, all the stuffed wildlife and the birds and all that in the natural. It's every bit as impressive as the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. I mean, I guess I don't know. I can't even picture comparing them in my mind, but they're both wonderful. They add Navy Pier into that and the restaurants, and it's a great place to visit.
Did you ever hit the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, my gosh, it's amazing.
Those Mercury space capsules, Skip, I don't know if you had the same impression that I did, but you'll look at it, and it looks like something that somebody would have made in their basement. And they put a live human being in that thing and shot it into outer space. It's incredible to see.
Right. Well, we say that now because we spend our days, when we need to go somewhere, let me just hop on Southwest and fly across the country. But in the 60s, flying was a magical big deal, much less space travel. So to them, a 1960 person, they didn't think of that as primitive. They said, well, I'd never seen something like this. But we look at it now and go, how would they ever get in that? Why would you do that? Don't you understand? We grew up on Star Trek and Star Wars and the spaceships, the fake spaceships there. And we laugh at these things, but these actually worked. Do this. Take the Amtrak train to Chicago, get a nice hotel, Uber around to the museums, have a couple good dinners, come home. Great weekend.
And for people planning vacations, hopefully some of this information was useful. All right, here we are in the month of May, halfway through. I just remember when I was a kid, that was the time that if we needed a new car, my dad never really bought new cars. He always bought used cars. But still, if we were car shopping, it always seemed like April and May, that was the time that we went out. Same deal at Weber Chevrolet at all the locations?
It's some of our best months. We got people ramping up. You can tell. They even maybe sometimes acknowledge it. Yeah, we were just waiting until it got warmer. We were waiting until the bad weather over, whatever. School's out time, graduation time, Mother's Day, whatever it might be. Longer days, nice weekends. Maybe the first or second nice weekend is past. So your initial post-winter yard work is caught up. And so now you have a good Friday and Saturday to come out. Whatever the reason, there's a lot more traffic in the summer, and we just take advantage of it. I mean, it's funny because if you look at our website, I've been telling you that March and April were truck month for both Ford and Chevy. But if you look at our website, our prices for trucks are the same or lower than March or April. We have truck month every month. I don't care what Chevrolet says. Our philosophy is we want to sell more trucks than anything else every month. So we're always going to have that great price. And we also have some military appreciation rebates for active and retired military and first responders. So check those out too. If you fall in those categories, you can get a little bit extra money on several of our vehicles too.
All right. Weber Chevrolet, 3 locations, Granite City, Columbia, Illinois, Olive and 270. Online, WeberChevrolet.com. Ford dealership in Metro East. Skip Weber. Have a great week. We'll talk to you in a couple of days. Thanks.
Thanks, JC.
Radio? Who needs a radio?
Like what you're hearing? Don't forget JC's Wayback Machine every Saturday night from 6 until 9 on 101.9 and 94.1 News Talk STL and the free News Talk STL app.
I know that people who listen to this radio station would not necessarily say that Stephen Colbert is their cup of tea, but this is a very slippery slope we're talking about, and this should be of concern to everybody. Any kind of censorship of either side should be of concern to you. But it's interesting because we've all been hearing all of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And what you've been hearing for, I don't know, the last 6 months at least, is all the shifting and wheeling and dealing and all the stuff that goes into decisions that are made on a network level with regard to who's going to do what. And you got all these mergers and acquisitions and all the politics involved and everything. And I'm not talking about the politics that Colbert has espoused on his show for the last 11 years. I'm talking about the politicking that goes on behind the scenes as to how decisions are made. You'd think, okay, hire somebody with talent, put them on the air. If they get good ratings, go ahead, sell the crap out of it, and everybody goes away happy. It's a hell of a lot more complicated than that, as we are finding out, especially when you talk about these big multi-billion-dollar acquisitions and, Paramount and NBC and CBS and ABC and Kimmel and all the stuff that's going on. You're hearing about this stuff really in a way that really the public's not accustomed to hearing about. It's much more complicated behind the scenes. I mean, look at this stuff that's going on at CBS with Barry Weiss, who is an angry lesbian, and she's taking it out on everybody. And so you got this Tony DeCopel thing, which is just crashing and burning, and the ratings just keep going down and down and down. And I've been trying to explain this to everybody about how complicated this stuff is behind the scenes. Most of the time, you never hear about it. You never hear the details. You just hear about the outcome. Somebody loses their job, somebody gets laid off, and you figure, well, maybe their ratings were no good, or maybe they were difficult to get along with. And a lot of times, it's got nothing to do with any of that stuff. It's got to do with things that are going on behind the scenes that you'll never know anything about. I have certainly been on the receiving end of that. Sometime I'll do a whole dissertation about how the Rams hated me, and we were the flagship station on KLOU. We were the flagship for the Rams radio broadcasts, and those guys were doing everything they could to get me off the air, and they finally did. And I've worked in a couple of insane asylums. The all sports AM station in town would probably have to be one of the better examples of complete and total chaos, mismanagement, people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, everybody going off in different directions, egos completely out of control, nobody who seems to be in a position to really manage any of this, and so much jealousy and backbiting and people trashing one another as soon as you leave the room. It is insane. But the other place that was nuts was an operation called River City Broadcasting. And this was back in the early and, well, pretty much all of the 90s. And what had happened was a couple of TV guys who were not really interested in running or managing anything. They were, again, all into the mergers and acquisitions. They were predators. You look for something vulnerable and cheap, you buy it, you try to build it up, and then you sell it. You make a lot of money. Everybody else gets screwed in the process, and people lose their jobs. That's how they operate. They're predators, and these guys were. So they bought these two low-power FM signals. One was the Point, and one was, well, at the time it was called the Fox, and it eventually morphed into the River. And both of them were low-power signals with transmitters that were way, way outside of St. Louis. I think one was in St. Genevieve, and one was even further than that. And one of the stations did all right. That was the Point. They ended up moving the broadcast tower in closer to St. Louis, which is not always easy to do. You got to get through the FCC, and whenever you're dealing with the FCC, God, don't even start. And so that station really did all right, and it's still there today. The other one was the Fox, which, as I said, eventually morphed into the River. And they hired me, and the reason I went there is because I needed a job, number one, and they said, okay, this crappy signal that we have, don't worry about it, because just like the Point, we're going to move the transmitter right over near Wash U in the DeBoliver area, and that's going to solve all the problems. It'll be great, no problem. It'll take a couple of months, but you come on in here, you get up and running, and you go, and then we'll move the tower, and again, everybody goes away happy. Yeah, except that they never moved the tower in the 2 years that I was there. And so I'm trying to do a show every day, and the signal wasn't even strong enough for people to pick up on their clock radios because, you know, their eyes got a little bigger than their stomachs, and they just figured, well, we moved the Point, and we'll move the River too. That'll be great, no problem. Well, they were grappling with the FCC, and they were never able to move until after I left. And after they converted it from the Fox into the River, really the whole radio station was dependent upon, did Sarah McLachlan put out an album that year? When she did, the ratings were up a little bit. When she didn't, the ratings were down. And all that stuff. Paula Cole, 4 non-blondes. And it was complicated by the fact they brought in a guy to run the station from Los Angeles. He had a wife and a family out there. But the midday girl that he hired for the River, well, let's just say there was a little quid pro quo going on. I, the PD, receive Hummers on a regular basis. You get to run the station. Quid pro quo. And everybody knew what was going on, and nobody respected him because they knew he had a wife and kids 2,000 miles away. And she, not the wife, the midday girl, was out with the record company guys almost every night, just drinking and, you know, eating free meals. And again, quid pro quo. We give you all this stuff. You get our records on the radio station, which is why you heard songs by the Swinging Stakes, still today recognized as a powerhouse group, and some chick named Michelle Shocked. And it was bad enough we were playing these songs, but then on Tuesday, they were doing 2 for Tuesday, and so now you have to play 2 Swinging Stakes songs back to back. But perhaps the most entertaining part of the whole thing is that 2 girls that I actually liked, and I still like today, and that was Mary Ellen Owens and Sarah Clark. And I don't know what was going on over there, but these 2 were constantly fighting, and their office was right next to ours. And everybody would get off the air at 10 o'clock, would go downstairs, and you would hear screaming coming out of the office. And these 2 were just saying the kinds of things that, and I think everybody's been here before, saying the kinds of things where you're like, oh, I see. So now we are saying what we really think. And so now we're saying things to one another because we know that after today, we are never going to speak to one another again. Therefore, I'm really unloading on your ass. Good night, Irene. And then the next day, they'd be back in the studio like nothing happened. I don't know how chicks do that. So while I was doing the morning show at the River with a guy by the name of Tom Brown, and he had never even done radio before, he was also a TV guy, and Tom was real funny, but the relationship between me and the management at the River was deteriorating as my contract was up very, very soon, and we found out that he was going into the management, into their offices every day after the show and saying, hey, you can get rid of JC and all his people and I can do the show. And I can do it for a lot less money. Wouldn't that be great? Well, like I said, we found out about it, but we couldn't say anything to him. So for 3 months, for the next 3 months, we had to be in that studio with him every day and do a show every day for 4 hours, knowing that he was trying to get us fired and take over the show, which, by the way, finally worked. and they did get rid of us, and they gave him the show, and he tanked. I don't even think he lasted 6 months. And as if to make all of this even more bizarre, sort of in the middle of all of this company, these guys, like I said, they were predators. They said, you know what? We got the Channel 30 TV studios right below the radio studios on the bottom floor. Let's start a TV news operation, which, by the way, is a gargantuan task and very, very expensive. And while they were tearing the old studios apart, literally right below us, I guess a couple of weeks into the demolition, they discovered asbestos. So now you get these guys in there with the moon suits on, and they're cleaning out the asbestos, but they're just tearing everything to shreds like you do during a demolition. And in the process, somehow we ended up with a hole in our floor of our radio studio. You could look straight down through the hole and see these guys walking around in their moon suits because of the asbestos. And of course, I'm thinking to myself, any chance any of that asbestos is going to come up through this hole here into our studios? Is anybody concerned about that? And the cherry on top of this whole thing is that they hired an old news director from Channel 4 who I worked for, who was insane, and he hired a woman named Iola Johnson, who got pulled over by the police in Dallas. Apparently the cops had been following her for miles, and she said she couldn't hear the siren because she had the radio up too loud. And then they hired a guy named Lloyd Immel, and if you talk to people in television who were around at that time, this guy was hilarious. They sent him out on a call for a fire down in South City, and they're like, let's go live now to Lloyd Immel on the scene of the fire. And he says to the police chief, where are we right now? True story. That news division did not last very long. Adventures in incompetence. Taking us out of JC's Sunday Showgram for May 17, 2026, here on 101.9, 94.1, and the News Talk STL app.
The JC Corcoran Podcast.